Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle intentions.
Intentions.
Yeah. How to make them work for us, not against us. We're diving deep into Buddhist teachings for this one.
Sounds fascinating. Which texts are we looking at?
Primarily pasted text. There's this section, Noble Strategy, that really caught my eye, all about how the road to nirvana is paved with, skillful intentions.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Nirvana intentions, skillful ones that lay it on me.
I think a lot of us have felt that, even when we have good intentions, things can still go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. You try to do something nice and it backfires completely.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack that, figure out how to really make those intentions work for us,
I'm in. So where do we start?
Well, the text starts by saying that in Buddhism, intentions aren't seen as some fixed trait.
Really? How so?
They're viewed more as a skill, something you can develop, like a muscle you got to train.
That's interesting. So the more we work on it, the more skillful our intentions become.
Precisely. And that totally flips the script on those road to hell is paved with good intentions sayings, right?
Yeah, it kind of makes you rethink that whole idea.
Right. Because it's not just about good or bad intentions. It's about how skillful we are with them.
So having good intentions is like step one. Then you gotta level up those skills.
Exactly. And the text even uses this cool analogy of roads, like a road to hell and a road to, the heavens of pleasure.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. And it emphasizes how the road we end up taking, the direction our life goes, is shaped by our intentions.
Makes sense. So a well-intentioned action, but done unskillfully, could still lead to a not so great outcome.
Absolutely. Imagine you want to throw your friend a surprise party.
Always a recipe for disaster, right?
Well, maybe not always. But the intention is good, right? You want to make them happy.
Totally.
But what if you don't plan it well and it ends up a total flop? Then your friend feels disappointed, maybe even embarrassed.
Ooh. Yeah. Good intentions, bad execution. Classic combo.
It's like when you're trying to bake a cake and forget the baking powder. It's all good intentions, but you end up with a flat, sad cake.
The best of intentions.
Yeah.
But a pretty terrible cake.
Yeah.
And speaking of things going wrong, the text points to delusion as a major obstacle to having those skillful intentions.
Collusion. So we might think our intentions are good, but we're actually kind of fooling ourselves.
Yeah, sometimes we're just not seeing things clearly.
Okay, yeah, that resonates.
Yeah.
I remember the text listed greed, aversion, and delusion as the 3 roots of unskillfulness. And honestly, delusion feels like the trickiest one.
For sure. Greed and aversion seem a little easier to spot,
Right. You kind of know when you're being greedy or avoiding something out of aversion. But delusion, it's sneakier.
It can be hard to catch yourself in the act, for sure.
Have you ever had that experience? You acted with what you thought was a good intention, but then things went totally sideways.
Oh, yeah. Way too many times to count. I think we've all been there at some point.
Right. It's how do we avoid that?
Well, luckily, the text doesn't just point out the problem. It offers solutions, too.
Oh, good. Because I definitely need some guidance in this skillful intentions department.
Well, the Buddha, he actually gave some really practical advice to his son, Rahula, that we can all use today.
All right, give us the goods. What do you say?
He highlighted 2 key things: appropriate attention and friendship with admirable people.
Ooh, okay, I'm liking this already. Appropriate attention. That sounds pretty mindful. But what does that look like, in real life?
Think of it like this. You're constantly checking in with yourself, asking yourself the right questions before, during, and after you do something.
Okay, so it's like a built-in intention check system. But wouldn't that get exhausting, constantly questioning everything you do?
It doesn't have to be a burden, really. It's more about a gentle awareness.
Okay, that sounds a little more manageable.
Yeah, so before you do something, just pause for a sec. Ask yourself, what's my intention here? What are the possible consequences?
Gotcha. So think before you act, basically.
Yeah, and then while you're doing the thing, just be mindful. Notice if anything is off, if there are any unintended consequences popping up.
Right, and then you can adjust course if you need to.
Exactly. And after you've done something, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself, did things turn out how I intended? If not, why? What can I learn from it?
So it's not just about the initial intention, but about staying present and flexible throughout the whole process.
Precisely. It's a practice.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the other piece of advice? Friendship with admirable people. That just sounds like a good idea in general.
Right. Basically, surround yourself with good company. People who have qualities you admire, like generosity, wisdom, compassion, that kind of thing.
So it's like having a team of positive role models helping you stay on track.
Exactly. And just by being around them, you're kind of getting a constant nudge towards skillful action.
That makes so much sense. Like, we don't have to figure this all out on our own.
Not at all. There's strength in community.
But what about those times when our intentions are good? We've tried to be mindful, but we still make mistakes. We've all been there, right? Those choices that seemed right at the time but ended up, well, not so great. How do we deal with those missteps without getting bogged down in guilt?
That's a great question, and it's something the Buddhist approach to mistakes really tries to address.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
So they actually distinguish between guilt and a different type of shame.
Shame and guilt. Those are pretty loaded words, especially when we're talking about intentions. How does Buddhism differentiate them?
Well, think of guilt as that feeling of beating yourself up for being a bad person. Shame, in the Buddhist sense, is more about recognizing that an action was beneath you, like it wasn't in line with your true self.
So it's not, oh, I'm a terrible person, but more like, that wasn't my best self, I can do better.
Exactly. It's a way of holding yourself to a higher standard, but without the self-loathing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like recognizing the mistake and feeling motivated to learn from it, not just wallowing in guilt.
Right. And the text emphasizes that this kind of shame can actually be a really strong motivator for change.
Because it's not about putting yourself down, but about inspiring you to become your best self.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging your mistakes, being honest with yourself, and resolving to do better next time.
Not aiming for unrealistic perfection, but for continuous growth.
Exactly. And even the Buddha made mistakes. It's how we deal with them that matters. So we were talking about the Buddha making mistakes. It's kind of comforting, isn't it?
It is. Like, even the Buddha, the Buddha wasn't perfect. It takes the pressure off a bit.
Totally. The text actually highlights how important it is to be honest with ourselves, about our intentions and the impact of our actions.
Right, like owning up to our mistakes, even if it's tough.
Yeah. And then, instead of getting stuck in that guilt and blame cycle, we can try to shift our focus.
Oh, interesting. To what?
To understanding, why we messed up, what we can learn from it. It's about seeing those mistakes as, opportunities for growth.
Yeah. It's like that saying, we don't have to be defined by our past, we can choose a different path.
Yeah, that's a good one. And, the text mentions this interesting idea about shame. Not the, I'm a terrible person kind of shame.
Right, because we just talk about how that kind of shame isn't helpful.
Exactly. They're talking about a shame that recognizes an action as beneath your dignity.
Okay, so it's more about realizing, hey, I can do better than that.
Yeah, like a wake-up call to align your actions with your values,
It's like a reminder to step up your game. I like that.
And the text even suggests that this type of shame can actually be a sign of high self-esteem.
Wait, really? How so?
It's like you're honoring yourself by making choices that reflect your true worth. You're not settling for less than you deserve.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. It's about respecting yourself enough to strive for better.
Exactly. But we've been talking a lot about skillful intentions and how to cultivate them. But where does this all lead, ultimately?
Wait, what's the end goal here?
Well, in Buddhism, the ultimate goal is nirvana.
Nirvana, yeah. That state of complete liberation, freedom from suffering.
Yeah. And get this, the text says that skillful intentions can actually lead us to the very edge of nirvana.
Wow, the edge of nirvana. That sounds intense. But what does that even mean?
It's a bit tricky to explain, but imagine you're a master archer.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You've trained for years, you can hit the bullseye every time, no problem.
Total archery pro.
Right. But even with all that skill, even when you're aiming perfectly, there's still that slight tension, that effort involved.
Yeah, you're still trying to hit the target.
Exactly. And reaching nirvana, it's about letting go of even that subtle effort. It's about moving beyond aiming and simply being.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Letting go of even skillful intention.
Yeah, it's a pretty mind-blowing concept, but the idea is that skillful intentions, they can take us really far on the path.
Really? The training wheels for reaching nirvana.
Something like that. But at some point, we got to take those training wheels off and learn to ride without them.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real, most of us aren't at the letting go of all intention stage yet.
Totally. We're still down here navigating life's ups and downs, trying to figure out this whole intention thing.
Right. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we get from where we are now to, the edge of nirvana?
Well, remember how we talked about mindfulness?
Yeah, paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions in the present moment.
Exactly. And it plays a crucial role in this whole process. The text emphasizes how skillful intentions actually lead us towards a more mindful way of being.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, you could say that. The more mindful we are, the more skillful our intentions become, which then leads to even greater mindfulness.
I love that. It's like mindfulness helps us refine those intentions, which then leads to a more mindful way of life. It all works together.
Exactly. But, we've got to be real here. Even with the best intentions and all the mindfulness in the world, we're still going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's inevitable, right?
It's part of being human. But how we deal with those mistakes, that's what matters.
That's where self-compassion comes in, right?
Absolutely. Oh, remember that master archer we were talking about? Even the best archer in the world misses the target sometimes.
Right? They're not perfect.
Exactly. And it's the same with us. We're going to miss the mark sometimes. We're going to act on intentions that weren't so skillful.
Yeah, that happens. And then, the guilt and self-criticism can really kick in.
It's easy to fall into that trap, but it's not helpful. The key is to approach those mistakes with kindness and understanding like you would a friend who's struggling.
Okay, so it's about treating ourselves with the same compassion we'd offer to someone else.
Exactly. We're all learning, we're all growing. Setbacks are just part of the journey.
That's such a good reminder. It's easy to forget that sometimes, especially when we're striving for something as profound as, reaching nirvana.
It can feel really daunting, but the path is less about striving for an unattainable ideal and more about cultivating a gentle awareness of our intentions in each moment.
I love that. It takes the pressure off needing to be perfect all the time.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection.
So let's say we mess up. We've acted on a less than skillful intention. What's the best way to course correct?
Well, remember that distinction the text made between guilt and shame.
Yeah, that I'm a terrible person, guilt versus the I can do better than that shame.
Right. It's about tapping into that second type of shame, not to beat ourselves up, but to motivate ourselves to do better.
Like, okay, that wasn't my best move, but I'm going to learn from it and move on.
Exactly. It's a way of holding ourselves accountable without getting lost in self-judgment.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're acknowledging the mistake, we're not dwelling on it, and we're committing to doing better next time.
Exactly. It's a process of continuous learning and growth.
I like that. It's about progress, not perfection.
You got it. And remember, we don't have to do this alone.
Right. The text emphasizes the importance of surrounding ourselves with positive influences.
Yeah, those admirable people. Finding a community, whether it's a meditation group, a spiritual gathering, or even just a group of friends who share your values, can make a huge difference.
It's like having a support system for your personal growth.
Exactly. They can offer guidance, encouragement, and inspiration along the way.
It's a reminder that we're not on this journey alone.
Exactly. And that sense of connection, that shared journey, it can make the path a lot less daunting and a lot more fulfilling.
I love that. It's a beautiful thought that even in our individual pursuit of, liberation or whatever you want to call it, we're connected to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. It's like we're all in this together.
So, to sum up what we've covered so far, would you say that the key takeaways are like mindfulness, self-compassion, and community?
Those are definitely some of the big ones. Remember, intentions are like a muscle. You can strengthen them through practice and mindfulness. Be honest with yourself about those intentions, even the ones that aren't so pretty. And be kind to yourself when you mess up, because it's going to happen. Mistakes are just opportunities for growth.
Those are great points. And I think it's also important to remember that this whole journey of cultivating skillful intentions, it's not just about personal growth.
Yeah.
It has a ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when we act with more skillful intentions, it impacts the people around us and ultimately the world as a whole.
It's like creating a chain reaction of positivity. And who knows, maybe if we all up our intention game, we can actually make the world a better place.
That's a really inspiring thought. But, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I got to ask, how do we take all this wisdom, all these teachings about skillful intentions and actually put them into practice in our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's one thing to understand these concepts, but it's another thing entirely to live them. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're back, ready to dive into the practical stuff.
The nitty-gritty of actually applying these skillful intention teachings in real life.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to talk about it, but how do we actually do it?
Oh, remember that advice the Buddha gave to his son Rahula about appropriate attention?
Yeah, that whole checking in with ourselves before, during, and after our actions thing.
Right. It's actually super practical when you break it down.
Okay, break it down for me, because To be honest, it sounds kind of overwhelming. Like, am I supposed to overthink every single thing I do?
Not at all. It's not about overthinking. It's more about like cultivating this gentle awareness.
Okay, gentle awareness. I could work with that.
So like before you act, just take a moment to pause.
Okay, pausing, got it. Then what?
Ask yourself, is this action going to cause harm? Like to myself or to others?
Right, so it's like a built-in ethics check. If it's going to cause harm, maybe rethink it.
Exactly. And then while you're doing the thing, in the midst of the action, just notice.
Yeah, guess what?
Just pay attention to how it feels. Are there any like unintended consequences popping up?
Okay, so if it's not feeling right, course correct.
Exactly. You can adjust as you go or even like stop altogether if you need to.
Got it. So being flexible is key. And what about after the action? What's the reflection process look like there?
The text talks about looking at the actual consequences, both short-term and long-term.
So like, did things turn out the way you thought they would?
Great. And if not, why not? What can you learn from the experience?
It's like a post-game analysis of our intentions. I like that. But let's get real. What about when we mess up? Like, we act on an intention that, well, wasn't so skillful.
Happens to the best of us.
But how do we deal with that without beating ourselves up? Because that guilt spiral can be intense.
The text is pretty clear on that. Guilt and remorse, they're not helpful in this process.
Yeah, they kind of just keep us stuck.
Exactly. Dwelling on the past doesn't really change anything. Instead, try to approach those mistakes with curiosity.
Curiosity instead of like, oh, I'm so stupid. Why did I do that?
Yeah. More like, that didn't go as planned. I wonder why. What can I learn from this?
Okay. Yeah, that's a much more constructive approach.
Right. It's about learning and growing, not punishing ourselves for being human.
And speaking of learning and growth, remember that whole thing about surrounding ourselves with admirable people?
Oh, yeah. Those positive influences, super important.
It's like building a support system for our personal development.
Right.
But what if you don't have a specific community or group to connect with?
It doesn't have to be formal. It could be friends, family, colleagues, anyone who inspires you, who embodies those qualities you admire.
So it's about being intentional about who we spend our time with.
Exactly. Choosing to surround ourselves with people who lift us up and challenge us to be better.
That's a really good point. And it makes me think about how, even though we're talking about individual intentions, this whole thing is kind of like interconnected,
Oh, for sure.
Like when we cultivate skillful intentions, it impacts the people around us and it ripples outward from there.
It creates a ripple effect. And those ripples, they can have a real impact on the world.
Exactly. So it's not just about our own personal growth or reaching nirvana or whatever. It's about contributing to a more compassionate, more skillful world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's like collectively raising our intention game,
Yeah, like a global intention upgrade. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Remember that cultivating skillful intentions is a practice. It's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process. And it's a practice that can transform not only our own lives, but also the world around us.
Beautifully said. So to our listeners, keep practicing, keep reflecting, keep those intentions skillful. And until next time, keep diving deep.